I never thought I would be the kind of person to fight a homeowners association. But when I opened that letter demanding an additional $7,895 on top of what I had already paid for our community's so-called infrastructure improvements, something in me snapped. My name is Franklin Leeds, and I had lived in the Willowbrook Commons development in Scottsdale, Arizona for 3 years. It was supposed to be a dream neighborhood with its manicured lawns, pristine walking paths, and that ridiculous fountain in the center of the community that nobody ever looked at, but everybody paid to maintain. When my wife Sarah and I moved in back in 2023, the HOA seemed reasonable enough. Dues were a bit high at $350 a month, but the amenities were decent, and the board president at the time, an older gentleman named Robert Chen, ran things fairly and transparently. Then Robert and his wife retired to Florida, and everything went straight to hell. The new board president was a woman named Sharon Whitmore, a 47-year-old real estate agent with blonde highlights that looked like they were applied with a paint roller, and an attitude that could curdle milk at 50 paces. She had moved into Willowbrook Commons about 6 months before taking over the board, and within weeks of her election, things started changing. First came the new regulations about what colors you could paint your mailbox post. Then there were the restrictions on when you could water your lawn, despite Arizona's heat making that a crucial daily activity. Then came the fines for having your garage door open for more than 30 minutes during daylight hours. But the special assessment was what really got everyone's attention. In March of 2026, every homeowner in our 243-home community received a letter explaining that our roads, sidewalks, and common areas needed immediate repairs that would cost approximately $1.2 million. The regular HOA reserves were insufficient. Sharon's letter explained in that condescending tone she seemed to inject into everything, so a special assessment was necessary. Each homeowner would be responsible for paying $5,000, due in 3 installments over 6 months. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with Sarah, staring at that letter like it was written in a foreign language. $5,000, Sarah had said, her dark eyes wide with disbelief. We just paid to replace the air conditioning unit. Where are we supposed to get $5,000? I know, I had replied, running my hand through my hair in frustration. But look at these roads. Have you seen any major damage? I drive these streets every single day and they look fine to me. Sarah had walked over to the window, looking out at our quiet cul-de-sac. The sidewalk in front of the Morrisons' house has that one crack, but that's it. This doesn't make any sense. That was April. By June, after we had dutifully paid our first and second installments totaling $3,333, Sharon sent out another letter. This one was even more infuriating than the first. Due to unforeseen complications and rising material costs, the letter explained, the original assessment had been insufficient. An additional assessment of $2,895 per household was now required, bringing the total to $7,895 per home. The final payment would be due by the end of July, and failure to pay would result in a lien being placed on the property. That was the letter that made me snap. I called my neighbor, Marcus Foster, a corporate accountant who lived 3 doors down. Marcus was in his early 50s, bald as a cue ball, and had the kind of analytical mind that could spot financial irregularities from a mile away. He had also been grumbling about the assessment since it was first announced. "Marcus, this is insane," I said when he answered. "Have you seen the new letter?" "Yeah, I saw it," Marcus replied, and I could hear the anger in his voice. Nearly $3,000 more. Franklin, I have been doing some math and it does not add up. 243 homes times $7,895 is over $1.9 million. The original letter said the repairs would cost $1.2 million. I felt my stomach drop. So, where is the extra $700,000 going? That's exactly what I want to know, Marcus said. Listen, I think we need to call an emergency homeowner meeting. The HOA bylaws allow for that if we can get 10% of homeowners to sign a petition. 10% is only about 24 signatures, I calculated quickly. I can get that in a day just on our street and the next one over. Then let's do it, Marcus said, because something here stinks and I want answers. Over the next week, I walked around Willowbrook Commons with a clipboard, knocking on doors and explaining the situation. Most people were eager to sign. A few were hesitant, worried about antagonizing Sharon and the board, but even they eventually came around when I showed them Marcus's calculations. By the following Tuesday, I had 47 signatures, nearly double what we needed. I submitted the petition to Sharon via certified mail, as required by the bylaws. The rules stated she had to schedule a meeting within 14 days. She scheduled it for exactly 14 days later, on a Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in the community clubhouse. When Sarah and I arrived at the clubhouse that Thursday, the parking lot was already packed. I had to park on the street 2 blocks away. Inside, every chair was filled and people lined the walls. I saw faces I recognized from around the neighborhood and many I had never seen before. Everyone was talking in low, angry voices. The energy in the room felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Sharon sat at the front table with the other 4 board members. Her best friend, Patricia Drummond, who served as treasurer, a quiet guy named Kenneth Young, who was the secretary, and 2 other members, Deanne Fisher and Robert Hammond, who rarely spoke at meetings. Sharon was wearing a cream-colored blazer and had her arms crossed, her expression somewhere between bored and irritated. At exactly 7 o'clock, Sharon banged a gavel on the table. "This meeting will come to order," she announced in that sharp voice of hers. I understand there are concerns about the special assessment. Before we open the floor to comments, I want to make it clear that this board has acted entirely within its authority as outlined in the CC and Articus. The assessment was necessary and properly noticed. A man in the back shouted, "We want to see the numbers." Sharon's jaw tightened. "The numbers have been provided in the letters sent to each homeowner." "Those letters don't show anything," Marcus called out from his seat near the front. He stood up, and I could see he had brought a folder full of papers. "Those letters give vague descriptions and round numbers. We want to see actual contracts, bids, invoices, and receipts. We want a full accounting of where $1.9 million is going." The room erupted in applause and shouts of agreement. Sharon banged the gavel again. "Order! This is not a town hall for people to make wild accusations. The board has fiduciary responsibility and we have exercised it appropriately." "Then show us the documentation," I said, standing up. "If everything is legitimate, you should have no problem providing complete transparency. Every homeowner here has paid thousands of dollars. We have the right to know exactly how that money is being spent." Sharon's face was turning red. "The board is not required to provide granular detail about every expenditure. That information is reviewed by the board and is considered private business information." "That's not true," Marcus said, flipping through his folder. Arizona Revised Statutes Title 33, Chapter 16. Section 33-1805 requires HOAs to make financial records available to homeowners upon request. That includes contracts, invoices, and all records of assessments. Sharon looked like she had bitten into a lemon. Those records are available during regular business hours by appointment. Great, Marcus said. I would like to make an appointment for tomorrow morning to review all financial records related to the special assessment. I will need to check the schedule, Sharon said stiffly. The law says you have 10 business days to comply, Marcus continued. I am making a formal request right now in front of all these witnesses. I expect full access to all records within 10 business days. The crowd applauded again. Sharon looked ready to explode, but Patricia leaned over and whispered something in her ear. Sharon took a deep breath. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. You can submit a written request and I will respond according to the statute. The meeting continued for another hour, with homeowner after homeowner standing up to express their frustration and demand answers. Sharon deflected, dodged, and dismissed almost every concern. By the time 9 o'clock rolled around and Sharon finally adjourned the meeting, I felt exhausted and angry. As people filed out of the clubhouse, Marcus pulled me aside. She is hiding something, he said quietly. Did you see how defensive she got? Yeah, I agreed. But we got her to agree to provide the records. That's a start. I am going to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb, Marcus said. If there is any funny business, I will find it. True to his word, Marcus submitted a formal written request the next morning. Sharon sent back a terse email acknowledging receipt and stating the documents would be available for review at the community management office. When Marcus showed up 10 days later, right at the deadline, he found the office locked with a note saying the manager was out sick. Convenient, Marcus told me that evening, but she cannot avoid me forever. I sent another email demanding access and citing the statute again. She has to comply or risk legal action. 3 days later, Sharon finally allowed Marcus into the office. He spent 6 hours photographing and documenting everything he could find. When he called me that night, his voice was shaking. Franklin, you need to come over right now. I found something and it is bad, really bad. I drove to Marcus's house immediately. He had his dining room table covered in printed documents, spreadsheets, and highlighted pages. His laptop was open, showing multiple spreadsheets. Okay, Marcus said, putting on his reading glasses. So here is what I found. The original assessment was supposed to be $5,000 per home, which would generate about $1.215 million. Sharon told everyone the costs had risen and we needed the additional assessment. But look at this. He showed me a contract with a company called Desert Sun Infrastructure. This is the contract for the road repairs. It is dated March 15, 2026. The total cost is $780,000, not $1.2 million, $780,000. I felt my blood run cold. So where did the rest go? Wait, it gets worse, Marcus said, flipping to another document. Here is the contract for sidewalk repairs, $215,000, and here is the contract for landscaping improvements in common areas, $95,000. Franklin, all of the legitimate contracts add up to $1,090,000. I did the math in my head. So the total assessment collected is $1.9 million, but the actual contracted work is only $1,090,000. That is a difference of $810,000. Actually, Marcus said grimly, it is worse than that. Look at these invoices. He showed me a series of invoices from the contractors. The Desert Sun Infrastructure invoice showed they had been paid $780,000 as contracted. But there was another invoice, dated a week later, for an additional $123,000 for additional materials and labor. Did the contract allow for additional charges? I asked. Not according to the contract language, Marcus said. It was a fixed-price contract, but here is where it gets really interesting. Look at this invoice from a company called Whitmore Properties, LLC. I stared at the invoice. Whitmore Properties had billed the HOA for $189,000 for project management and consulting services. Whitmore, I said slowly. Is that Sharon's company? Marcus nodded. I looked it up. Whitmore Properties, LLC was registered in Arizona in 2019. The registered agent is Sharon Diane Whitmore. Our HOA president paid her own company nearly $200,000 out of the assessment money. I sat down heavily in one of Marcus's dining room chairs. That is embezzlement. That is fraud. That is exactly what it is, Marcus agreed. And it gets even worse. Remember Patricia Drummond, the treasurer? She owns a landscaping company called Patricia's Green Thumb Services. Guess who got the contract for the landscaping improvements? You have got to be kidding me. Nope. Patricia's company was paid $95,000 for landscaping work that was supposed to cost $60,000 according to the original bid documents. She overbilled by $35,000. I felt sick. So Sharon paid herself $189,000. Patricia overbilled by $35,000, and there was an extra charge from Desert Sun for $123,000. That is $347,000 in questionable expenses. Marcus shook his head. It is worse. I went through the payment records. Desert Sun Infrastructure's additional invoice. The work they claim to have done was never authorized by a board vote, which is required for any expenditure over $10,000 according to the bylaws. And when I looked up Desert Sun Infrastructure, guess who is listed as a partner in that company? No. Yes, Sharon's husband, David Whitmore. He is a silent partner with a 30% stake. I put my head in my hands. So Sharon created a fake assessment, inflated the costs, paid her own company almost $200,000, steered contracts to her friend Patricia, and her husband's company got additional unauthorized payments. This is not just fraud. This is organized theft. And every homeowner in Willowbrook Commons paid for it, Marcus said quietly. Franklin, we need to go to the police. This is criminal. I agreed, but I also knew we needed ironclad evidence. We need a professional audit. Someone who can document all of this properly, who can testify if it goes to trial. We need to make sure this is bulletproof. Marcus thought for a moment. I know a guy, Richard Palmer. He is a forensic accountant who specializes in fraud investigations. He works with law firms and sometimes with law enforcement. I worked with him on a corporate fraud case a few years ago. He is expensive, but he is the best. How expensive? Probably $25,000 to $30,000 for a full audit. I whistled. That is a lot of money. Yeah, but think about it, Marcus said. If we can prove Sharon stole $189,000 plus all the other fraud, we can sue to get it back. We can also probably get attorney fees and costs. And if she gets criminally charged, restitution would be part of any plea deal or sentence. He was right. Okay, but we cannot afford that on our own. We need to get other homeowners involved. Over the next week, Marcus and I met with groups of neighbors, showing them the documents and explaining what we had found. The reaction was a mix of shock, anger, and determination. We formed a committee of 12 homeowners who agreed to pool funds to hire Richard Palmer. Each of us contributed $2,500, raising the $30,000 we needed. Richard Palmer was a tall, thin man in his early 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a calm, methodical demeanor. When Marcus and I met with him at his office in downtown Phoenix, he listened to our story without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound notebook. This sounds like a fairly straightforward case of self-dealing and embezzlement, Richard said when we finished. I will need complete access to all HOA financial records, bank statements, contracts, invoices, and correspondence. How cooperative do you think the board will be? Not very, I said. Sharon fought us tooth and nail just to let Marcus see the basic records. Richard nodded. Then we will need to compel production through legal means. I will work with an attorney to send a formal demand letter citing Arizona statutes and threatening litigation if they do not comply. Most HOA boards fold when they get a letter from a lawyer. If they still refuse, we can file a motion to compel in court. How long will this take? Marcus asked. If they cooperate, I can have a preliminary report in 3 to 4 weeks. A full forensic audit might take 2 to 3 months depending on the complexity. But given what you have already shown me, I think we will have enough for a criminal referral pretty quickly. Richard was right. His attorney sent the demand letter on a Monday. By Friday, Sharon's lawyer responded agreeing to provide access to all records. I suspected Sharon's attorney had taken one look at the situation and told her she had no choice but to comply. Richard spent the next month buried in HOA financial records. He worked out of a conference room at his office, surrounded by boxes of documents, his laptop displaying multiple spreadsheets and financial analysis tools. Marcus and I checked in with him weekly, and each time he had found something new. She was not even subtle about it, Richard told us during one update. The invoice from Whitmore Properties LLC does not contain any detail about what services were actually provided. It just says project management and consulting. There are no timesheets, no scope of work, no deliverables. It is a completely fraudulent invoice. Can you prove that in court? I asked. Absolutely. In fact, I contacted the legitimate contractors and asked them about project management. Desert Sun Infrastructure told me they managed their own project. They did not need or use any outside project management. Same with the sidewalk contractor. Sharon just created an invoice and paid herself. By mid-September, Richard had completed his preliminary report. It was 37 pages long and devastating in its findings. Marcus, myself, and the other committee members met at Marcus's house to review it. Richard walked us through the key findings. The total special assessment collected from homeowners was $1,938,685. The total legitimate expenses for contracted work were $1,090,000. That leaves $848,685 unaccounted for. He pulled up a chart on his laptop. Here is where it went. Sharon Whitmore's company received $189,000 for fraudulent project management fees. Her husband's company, Desert Sun Infrastructure, received an additional $123,000 in unauthorized work that was never performed. Patricia Drummond's landscaping company was paid $35,000 over the legitimate bid. And then, there are a series of smaller payments to various vendors that I have traced back to shell companies controlled by Sharon and Patricia. Shell companies? I asked. Richard nodded. Sharon created 3 LLCs over the past year. One is called Arizona Community Services, another is Copper State Property Management, and the third is Scottsdale Facility Solutions. All 3 are registered to addresses that turn out to be mailbox rental locations. All 3 received payments from the HOA totaling another $92,000 for various services that were never actually performed. A woman named Catherine Reynolds, one of our committee members, spoke up. So, what is the total fraud? From what I can document with high confidence, $439,000. However, There are additional questionable expenses that might be legitimate but require further investigation. My conservative estimate of definite fraud is $439,000. My estimate of probable fraud is $512,000. The room was silent. Finally, Marcus said, "What do we do now?" Richard closed his laptop. "You have two options. One is to file a civil lawsuit against Sharon, Patricia, and the HOA itself to recover the stolen funds. That will take time and money, but you would likely win. The second option is to refer this to law enforcement for criminal prosecution, or you can do both." "I want to do both," I said immediately, and everyone in the room agreed. Richard said he would prepare a formal report for the Scottsdale Police Department and the Arizona Attorney General's office. In the meantime, our committee hired an attorney named Daniel Moss to file a civil lawsuit on behalf of all homeowners. Daniel Moss was a short, energetic man in his 40s who specialized in HOA disputes and real estate litigation. When we met with him at his office in Scottsdale, he reviewed Richard's preliminary report and let out a low whistle. "This is one of the most egregious cases of HOA fraud I have seen in my career," Daniel said. "And I have seen a lot. The good news is you have excellent documentation and a top-notch forensic accountant. The bad news is litigation is expensive and time-consuming." "How expensive?" Catherine asked. "I would estimate $50,000 to $75,000 in attorney fees and costs to take this through trial. However, Arizona law allows for recovery of attorney fees in HOA disputes if you prevail. So if we win, and I think we will, the defendants would have to pay your legal costs." "What about getting our money back?" I asked. "We will seek full restitution of all fraudulently obtained funds, plus interest, plus attorney fees and costs. We will also seek punitive damages for fraud. Depending on how the case goes, you could potentially recover significantly more than the $439,000 that was stolen." We agreed to move forward. Daniel filed a complaint in Maricopa County Superior Court on September 28, 2026, naming Sharon Whitmore, Patricia Drummond, David Whitmore, and Desert Sun Infrastructure as defendants. The complaint alleged fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, and unjust enrichment. At the same time, Richard submitted his forensic audit report to the Scottsdale Police Department. I met with Detective Lisa Grant of the Financial Crimes Unit to provide background and answer questions. Detective Grant was a woman in her late 30s with short brown hair and a no-nonsense attitude. She spent 2 hours with me going through the timeline and the evidence. "This is a solid case," Detective Grant said when we finished. "White-collar cases can be tricky because you need to prove intent, but when someone pays their own company almost $200,000 with no legitimate services provided, that is pretty clear intent. I am going to open a formal investigation." "What happens next?" I asked. "I will subpoena the HOA's bank records, interview witnesses, and review all the documents your forensic accountant provided. If the evidence supports criminal charges, I will present the case to the county attorney's office for prosecution. That process usually takes 3 to 6 months for a case this complex." "Will Sharon know she is being investigated?" "Eventually, yes. Once I start interviewing people and issuing subpoenas, word will get around, but I will not make any arrests until I have an airtight case." I left the police station feeling cautiously optimistic. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like justice might actually be served. Back in Willowbrook Commons, tensions were running high. Word of the lawsuit had spread through the community, and people had taken sides. Most homeowners were outraged at Sharon and supported the lawsuit. But there was a small group of Sharon's friends and allies who insisted she had done nothing wrong and that we were just troublemakers trying to harass the board. Sharon herself sent out a letter to all homeowners claiming the lawsuit was frivolous and that she had acted properly. The letter was full of vague legal language and accusations that Marcus and I were spreading lies. It was a desperate move, and most people saw right through it. In October, Sharon and the other defendants filed their response to the lawsuit, denying all allegations and claiming everything they did was authorized and appropriate. Their attorney, a man named Gregory Burke, filed a motion to dismiss the case, arguing that the business judgment rule protected the board's decisions. Daniel filed a strong opposition, pointing out that the business judgment rule does not protect fraud and self-dealing. The judge denied the motion to dismiss in November, clearing the way for discovery to begin. Discovery was the process where both sides could demand documents and take depositions. Daniel immediately served extensive document requests on all the defendants and scheduled depositions for Sharon, Patricia, and David Whitmore. Sharon's deposition was scheduled for January 15, 2027. I attended along with Marcus and several other committee members. We sat in a conference room at Daniel's office while a court reporter set up her equipment. Sharon arrived with her attorney, looking tired and angry. She wore a black pantsuit and minimal makeup. The confident, condescending woman who had run HOA meetings like a dictator was gone, replaced by someone who looked cornered and scared. Daniel started with basic background questions, then moved into the meat of the case. Mrs. Whitmore, can you explain what services Whitmore Properties LLC provided to Willowbrook Commons HOA in exchange for the $189,000 payment? Sharon glanced at her attorney, who nodded slightly. Project management services. Can you be more specific? What did those project management services entail? I oversaw the contractors, made sure the work was done correctly, coordinated schedules, things like that. Did you keep timesheets documenting the hours you spent on these project management activities? No. Did you provide any written reports to the board about the project management work you were doing? It was discussed at board meetings. Daniel pulled out a stack of board meeting minutes. I have reviewed all board meeting minutes from January through August of 2026. There is no mention of Whitmore Properties LLC providing any services. There is no mention of the $189,000 payment. In fact, the only mention of project management is in the treasurer's report showing the payment itself. Can you explain that? Sharon's face was flushed. I do not recall the specific discussions. You do not recall discussing a $189,000 payment to your own company. Objection, Sharon's attorney interjected. Argumentative. Daniel smiled slightly. I will rephrase, Mrs. Whitmore, did the board vote to approve the payment to Whitmore Properties LLC? Sharon hesitated. I do not recall a specific vote. The bylaws require a board vote for any expenditure over $10,000, correct? Yes. So a $189,000 payment would definitely require a board vote, correct? Yes. But there was no vote. Sharon looked at her attorney again. I would have to review the records. Daniel went on like this for 3 hours, methodically dismantling every excuse and explanation Sharon offered. By the end, Sharon looked defeated and her attorney looked worried. Patricia's deposition the following week was similar. She claimed her landscaping company had provided excellent work and that the pricing was fair. But she could not explain why her bid was $35,000 higher than the original estimate, or why there was no documentation of the additional work. David Whitmore's deposition was the most interesting. David was a large man in his mid-50s with graying hair and a nervous demeanor. He clearly had not wanted to be involved in any of this. When Daniel asked him about the additional $123,000 Desert Sun infrastructure had built, David stumbled over his answers. "That was for extra materials we had to order," David said. "What materials specifically?" "I would have to check with my operations manager." "Did you provide any documentation to the HOA showing what these extra materials were?" "I think so. I am not sure." Daniel pulled out the invoice. "This invoice just says additional materials and labor. There is no itemization." "Is that standard practice for your company?" "Sometimes." "Mr. Whitmore, is it true that your wife Sharon is the president of the Willowbrook Commons HOA?" "Yes." "Did you discuss this additional invoice with her before submitting it?" David shifted uncomfortably. "We might have talked about it." "Did she tell you to submit an invoice for $123,000 even though the work had not been done?" "Objection," Gregory Burke practically shouted. "You are putting words in his mouth." "I will rephrase," Daniel said calmly. "Mr. Whitmore, was all the work described in this invoice actually performed?" David was sweating now. "I am not sure. I would have to check with my project manager." "You are not sure if your company did $123,000 worth of work?" "It was a big project." "We did a lot of work. But you cannot confirm that you did the specific work you billed for in this invoice." David looked at his attorney, who shook his head slightly. David took a deep breath. "No, I cannot confirm that. It was a devastating admission." Daniel ended the deposition shortly after, looking very satisfied. While the civil case was progressing, Detective Grant was conducting her criminal investigation. In February of 2027, she interviewed me and several other homeowners. She also interviewed the legitimate contractors, who confirmed they had not needed or used any project management services from Sharon. The break in the criminal case came when Detective Grant interviewed Kenneth Young, the HOA secretary. Kenneth was a quiet, mild-mannered software engineer who had joined the board thinking he was doing a civic duty. He had slowly realized what Sharon and Patricia were doing, but was too intimidated to speak up. When Detective Grant interviewed him, Kenneth brought copies of emails and text messages he had saved. The messages showed Sharon explicitly discussing how to hide the payments to her company and how to structure the special assessment to maximize the amount they could collect. One text message from Sharon to Patricia read, "We need to build in enough buffer to cover our fees plus the extras. If we go with 1.9 million total, we should be safe." Another email from Sharon to David discussed the Desert Sun additional invoice. "Just bill for materials and labor. Keep it vague. They won't question it." These messages were the smoking gun Detective Grant needed. They showed clear intent to defraud the homeowners. In March of 2027, Detective Grant presented her case to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. The prosecutor assigned to the case was an assistant county attorney named James Porter, a serious man in his early 40s with a reputation for being tough on white-collar crime. After reviewing the evidence, James decided to file criminal charges. On April 7, 2027, Sharon Whitmore, Patricia Drummond, and David Whitmore were arrested and charged with multiple felonies including theft, fraud, and money laundering. The money laundering charges came from the shell companies Sharon had created to funnel HOA funds. I will never forget watching the news that evening and seeing Sharon being led out of her house in handcuffs, her face a mask of shock and humiliation. Part of me felt a surge of satisfaction, but mostly I just felt sad that it had come to this. The arrests made the local news and sent shockwaves through Willowbrook Commons. The remaining board members, Kenneth Young, Deanne Fisher, and Robert Hammond, immediately resigned. An emergency homeowner meeting was called to elect a new board. Marcus was elected as the new president, and I was elected vice president. Our first order of business was to hire a reputable property management company to handle the day-to-day operations and to begin the process of financial recovery. The criminal cases moved forward through the court system. Sharon, Patricia, and David all hired defense attorneys, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. In June of 2027, Patricia agreed to a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of theft and agreed to testify against Sharon in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was sentenced to 3 years of probation and ordered to pay restitution of $35,000 plus interest. David Whitmore also took a plea deal, pleading guilty to fraud and agreeing to pay restitution of $123,000. He received 2 years of probation and 6 months of home detention. Sharon refused to take a plea deal. She maintained her innocence and insisted she had done nothing wrong. Her case went to trial in September of 2027. The trial lasted 2 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the courtroom and watching as James Porter methodically presented the evidence. Richard Palmer testified about his forensic audit findings. Kenneth Young testified about the emails and text messages. The contractors testified that they never used Sharon's project management services. Marcus and I testified about the special assessment and how we had discovered the fraud. Sharon's defense attorney tried to argue that she had provided legitimate services and that the payment was reasonable. But he could not overcome the weight of evidence against her. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: theft, fraud, and money laundering. At her sentencing hearing in November, the judge did not mince words. Mrs. Whitmore, you held a position of trust in your community. Homeowners relied on you to manage their association fairly and honestly. Instead, you exploited that trust to steal nearly $200,000. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated, sustained scheme to defraud your neighbors. Sharon was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of early release after serving 85% of the sentence. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $189,000 plus interest, which brought the total to over $200,000 with the accrued interest. The civil lawsuit concluded around the same time. With the criminal convictions in hand, Sharon's defense in the civil case collapsed. In December of 2027, the judge granted summary judgment in favor of the homeowners on all claims. A jury trial was held solely to determine damages. The jury awarded full restitution of all fraudulently obtained funds, plus interest, plus punitive damages of $300,000, plus attorney fees and costs. The total judgment was over $900,000 against Sharon, with additional judgments against Patricia and David for their portions. Of course, getting a judgment and actually collecting money are 2 different things. Sharon had spent a significant amount of the stolen money, and her assets were limited. But Daniel Moss was relentless. He placed liens on Sharon's house, garnished her husband's wages, and seized business assets. Over the following year, the homeowners recovered approximately $415,000. It was not everything that was stolen, but it was a significant recovery. The HOA distributed the recovered funds back to homeowners as credits against future HOA dues, which provided some financial relief to everyone. As for Willowbrook Commons, the community slowly healed. Marcus proved to be an excellent HOA president, running the association with transparency and fairness. We implemented new policies requiring multiple board members to approve any expenditure over $5,000, mandatory annual independent audits, and quarterly financial reports to all homeowners. The roads and sidewalks that supposedly needed $1.9 million in repairs. We had them properly assessed by an independent engineer. He found that only about $300,000 in actual repairs were needed, which we completed using reserve funds and a small, legitimate special assessment of $1,200 per home. I learned a lot from this experience. I learned that even in a small community, corruption can take root when good people stay silent. I learned the importance of asking questions and demanding transparency. I learned that fighting back against injustice is exhausting and expensive, but absolutely necessary. Most importantly, I learned that communities are stronger than the individuals who try to exploit them. The homeowners of Willowbrook Commons came together, pooled their resources, and held corrupt leaders accountable. We proved that even when facing powerful people who abused their positions, ordinary citizens could fight back and win. Sarah and I still live in Willowbrook Commons. Our community is stronger now than it was before the scandal. People pay attention to HOA meetings. They ask questions about finances. They hold the board accountable. It took a crisis to wake everyone up, but once awake, we made sure it could never happen again. Sometimes I drive past Sharon's old house, which was eventually sold to pay off some of the judgment. A nice family with young kids lives there now. They have no idea about the drama that unfolded before they arrived, and that is probably for the best. They just see a nice neighborhood with well-maintained streets and friendly neighbors. On a warm evening in March of 2028, almost exactly 2 years after that first special assessment letter arrived, we held a community barbecue in the common area. Over 100 residents showed up, bringing food and drinks, their kids running around the fountain that nobody ever looked at but everybody paid to maintain. Marcus stood up to make a toast. "To Willowbrook Commons," he said, raising his beer. "We have been through hell and back, but we came out stronger. Here is to transparency, accountability, and never taking our community for granted again." Everyone cheered and clinked glasses. Sarah squeezed my hand and smiled at me. "You did good," she said quietly. "You could have just paid the assessment and moved on, but you fought back." "We fought back," I corrected her. "All of us together." And that was the truth. It was not just me or Marcus or Richard Palmer or Daniel Moss who won. It was every homeowner who signed the petition, who contributed to the legal fund, who attended meetings, who demanded answers, who refused to accept that corruption was just the price of living in an HOA. The final chapter of the saga came in June of 2029, when Sharon was released from prison after serving 3 years. I happened to see her at a grocery store in Scottsdale a few weeks after her release. She looked older, thinner, tired. Our eyes met across the produce section, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then Sharon looked away and hurried out of the store. I stood there holding a bag of apples, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. I did not feel triumphant or vindicated. I just felt sad that someone had made such terrible choices and destroyed so many lives, including her own. I paid for my groceries and drove home to Willowbrook Commons. The streets looked good, the landscaping was well maintained, and the community felt peaceful. As I pulled into my driveway, my neighbor Tom waved from his yard where he was watering his flowers well outside the restricted hours that Sharon used to enforce so zealously. I waved back, grabbed my groceries, and went inside where Sarah was making dinner and humming along to music playing from her phone. Life was good. The community was healthy. Justice had been served, even if imperfectly. And that night, as I fell asleep, I thought about how a simple HOA letter demanding more money had turned into a 2-year battle that exposed corruption, resulted in criminal convictions, and ultimately made our community stronger. It was exhausting and infuriating and expensive, but absolutely worth it, because at the end of the day, home is not just about the building you live in. It is about the community around you, the neighbors who have your back, and the shared commitment to doing what is right even when it is hard. Sharon Whitmore tried to steal that from us, tried to exploit our trust for her personal gain, but we did not let her win. We fought back with facts, evidence, determination, and the law on our side. We proved that homeowners have power when they work together, that corruption cannot survive in the light of transparency, and that justice, though sometimes slow, ultimately prevails. The Willowbrook Commons special assessment scandal became a case study in HOA fraud, used by attorneys and forensic accountants to teach others what to look for and how to fight back. Richard Palmer wrote an article about the case for a professional journal. Daniel Moss used it as an example in seminars he taught about HOA litigation. As for me, I never wanted to be an HOA crusader. I just wanted to live in my house, pay reasonable dues, and enjoy my community. But when I was faced with obvious fraud and corruption, I could not just look away. None of us could, and in fighting back, we did not just recover stolen money or put criminals in prison. We reclaimed our community. We reminded ourselves and each other that we have power, that we have rights, and that we have a responsibility to hold our leaders accountable. That is the real lesson of the Willowbrook Commons scandal. Not that HOAs are inherently corrupt, because most are not. Not that you should never trust your neighbors, because you should. But that vigilance is the price of a healthy community, that transparency is essential, and that when something does not add up, you should ask questions until you get real answers. 2 years after the scandal broke, 3 years after that first special assessment letter, Willowbrook Commons was thriving. Property values had actually increased because buyers appreciated the community's commitment to transparency and accountability. The new board published detailed monthly financial reports. Every contract was put out for competitive bidding, and we never, ever took another special assessment without extensive documentation and homeowner approval. Marcus served as president for 2 years before stepping down, satisfied that he had restored integrity to the association. I served as president for the next term, focusing on building up reserves so we would never need another special assessment. We implemented long-term capital planning, got expert assessments of all infrastructure, and budgeted conservatively. The fountain in the center of the community, the one nobody ever looked at but everybody paid to maintain, became a symbol of our recovery. We had it restored with proper reserve funds, added some nice lighting, and put benches around it. Now people actually stopped to enjoy it. Kids threw pennies in and made wishes, and it became a genuine gathering place. On the bench where I often sat during lunch breaks working from home, someone had placed a small plaque. It read, "In memory of the special assessment scandal of 2026, may we never forget to ask questions." I never found out who put it there, but I smiled every time I saw it. Sharon's legacy was not the money she stole or the trust she betrayed. Her legacy was a community that learned to stand up for itself, to demand accountability, to work together for the common good. In trying to exploit Willowbrook Commons, she accidentally made it stronger. And every time I paid my HOA dues, now back down to a reasonable $350 a month with full transparency about where every dollar went. I felt grateful. Not grateful for the scandal, but grateful for the community that emerged from it. Grateful for neighbors like Marcus who had the expertise to spot fraud. Grateful for professionals like Richard and Daniel who helped us fight back. Grateful for the justice system that ultimately held criminals accountable. The story of how our HOA overcharged the special assessment by $189,000, and how an independent audit exposed where it really went became part of Willowbrook Commons history. New residents learned about it, sometimes with disbelief that such a thing could happen in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Long-time residents shared their experiences, their frustrations, their determination to make sure it never happened again. And me. I went back to being just a regular homeowner, living my life, going to work, spending time with Sarah, maintaining my house, and occasionally attending HOA meetings to make sure things stayed on track. I never wanted to be a hero or a crusader. I just wanted fairness, honesty, and accountability. In the end, that is exactly what we got. It took 2 years of fighting, hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, criminal prosecutions, and a complete overhaul of our HOA's governance. But we got justice. We got our community back. And we got the satisfaction of knowing that when we were tested, when we faced corruption and fraud in our own backyard, we did not look away. We fought back. We won. And Willowbrook Commons was better for it.